Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our day two of the series, The Art of Uncovering the Role of a Warm Demander, what it means to be a warm demander. So, thank you for those who are here. We are excited to get started today as we talk about and extend our conversation on being a warm demander. So, if you are here with us, we would love for you to come in and tell us where you are, tell us where you're from, all of the things as we get started and we look into going deeper into the art of being a warm demander. So come on in. Yes. All right. So we're live on LinkedIn, we're live on Facebook, we're live on YouTube. All right, so we should all be coming in to the space. Let me see what's happening on LinkedIn because sometimes it takes a little while and it lags through. So I want to make sure that everything is coming through very good on your end. And it looks like we're looking good here on LinkedIn. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. All right, so I'm excited to continue this conversation because on last week we talked about one of the main focuses of being a warm demander and what it really means. So, to do a quick little recap, to be a warm demander is one who is a soul scholar. So, you are one, just like my shirt says, you are a lifelong learner and critical thinker. One who strives to connect the soul to learning. So, the goal is for us to humanize instruction, getting back to what good teaching really looks like when we see our students as whole human beings that work through an emotional brain, that also need our connectedness and they need our sense of belonging so that they can feel as though the learning is applicable to them. So they can feel as though the learning is worth the value, that the learning has relevance and it works in their lives. So I want to start by talking about the research. Castle posted on LinkedIn some research about social and emotional learning and academics. And as a warm demander, thinking about the word warm demander, right? Warm is a comfortable space, it's not too hot, not too cold. So we're doing the Goldilocks method, right? Where we are working on getting in that in between because as a warm demander, we have high expectations of every last one of our students. We don't look at them through a deficit lens. We don't look at them as though they have no strengths, they have no capacities, they have no way of being great. We see our students as full geniuses. Sometimes they've actualized parts of this genius in our classroom, sometimes they have not. But if we are using social and emotional learning as the foundation through which we do what we do, we will see some of these same results. So let me tell you what Castle said. Castle has shown that brain science, which is what I love, which is what we're always talking about with culturally responsive teaching, brain science shows that social, emotional, and cognitive, that means thinking, development are intertwined. They go together real bad, right? Social, emotional, and cognitive development are intertwined and integral. That means they are vital. It is the lifeline to academic learning and success. Here's another one. If academic instruction and activities that spark student emotions or connect cognitive challenges with social interaction, right? So in my PhD studies, we talked a lot about Lev Vygotsky and sociocultural theory, and it really hinged upon the fact that great learning takes place within social context. So if we're using students' emotions within our academic instruction, if we're using cognitive challenges that are connected to the environment. So we're building a space of belonging, we're building a space of welcoming. The results are deeper and longer term learning. Deeper and longer term learning. Now, I know some of us are really focused on the numbers. So even with the last piece of research that they showed, that using this, actually using social and emotional learning, being a warm demander, using culturally responsive teaching, it actually improved test scores, academic performance by 13 percentile points versus students who did not receive or did not participate in this social and emotional learning instruction. So it works, right? That's my whole point of everything, is I want us to see that these things actually work, that they actually make a difference. But it starts with us. It starts with us understanding our role as warm demanders. So if we are warm demanders, we talked about last week that we have an explicit focus on building rapport, building trust, right? So we engage with our students on a continuum of relationship building. A lot of time relationships are seen as something that we do at the beginning of the year, and then we leave it, right? We have all these amazing activities at the beginning of the year where we are, utilizing these games, and we are embedding fun, and we are getting to know our kids and they're getting to know us. And then by this time of the year, we've weaned off of that. But we've got to also understand the journey of a learner. They're not who they are necessarily, but their experiences shape how they show up throughout the year. So the learning of who our students are happens all year long. And because it happens all year long, we are connected to building this trust, building rapport, building validation, affirming our students. We're doing that throughout the entire school year. Why? Because we know that is the lifeline. Back to the research I just stated that was presented by Castle, integrating academics with our emotions, with our thinking capacities, within a social context is the lifeline to helping our students actualize their genius. Sometimes we've got to go back to the drawing board and think about, why am I doing what I do? Why is it important to be a warm demander? Why is it important for me to earn the right to demand? What is the point of that? And why is that important? We've got to think about that, because once we think about that, then we know that our students need us to be demanders, and not just cold demanders. Cold demanders are those who have these strict expectations, these high standards, but we don't provide the emotional support, the relational support to actually see these things through. So when that happens, we have a gap, and the gap is the instructional equity gap. Our students are not being reached with quality instruction, because if the instruction does not spark student emotion, which is what's going to bring you engagement, it's what's going to bring you to a place where your students are motivated, right? That's a journey they have to take on their own. We are simply, as educators, the facilitators of that work. We are the ones who are being the guide on the side instead of the stage, or the sage on the stage. It's not about centering ourselves and making their learning journey center us. Their learning journey has to center their pursuits, their interests, their modes of engagement, the way that they learn best, and then push them into a space to explore and be curious about other ways to learn. So today's focus is going to be on how are we going to close this instructional equity gap by focusing on these next components of being a warm demander. So the next components for today are presented again by the work of Zaretta Hammond in culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And she gives these next 2 points. I'll start with the first one: showing personal regard for students' identities, their lives, their experiences, and this happens through inquiry. This happens through being curious about who your students are versus assuming that you know who they are, assuming that you know their experiences, because underneath those assumptions are biases that have been informed either by what we're watching on the media. It could be social media, it could be television, it could be movies, it could be music, it could be all of the things that we think inform us and tell us, oh, this is who our students are. We know who they are because of this, versus you getting into a space where you are actually talking with them so that you can learn who they are from firsthand knowledge, right? Every time we do research papers, every time we do data collection, primary sources are always the top quality source, right? In my dissertation, in my master's program, in all these bachelor's program, all the extra schooling that I went through, primary sources were deemed the most valuable. Why? Because you get to hear the story firsthand. You're not hearing someone else's interpretation, because even if I'm writing about someone else's experience and I quote them, I may paraphrase. When I come to creating meaning behind what I've heard, what I've observed, that meaning is always going to be subjective. Yes, in dissertation studies, we work really, really hard to kind of tone down that subjectivity, right? So you have other people come in and look at your coding data. You have inter-rater reliability, where other people come in and analyze your findings and your discussions and your analysis and all these things to help mitigate bias. Because bias is always going to be present in each and every last one of us. But as warm demanders, we're consistently challenging and confronting those biases by, number one, showing personal regard. This is what a warm demander does. So, how can I do this? I know I mentioned, some of you see in the comments, that today's focus is on closing the gap, the instructional equity gap, through the role of humanized data. So we hear so much about high stakes testing. That's a big focus for those of us who are in schools, because we know that in order for schools to receive certain funding, in order for our students to receive the resources that they need, in order for our students to have all the things, there are certain criteria that must be met, right? And so, with that being said, we focus a lot on the test data, but we miss out on understanding that the test data is nothing without the story behind it. The test data is nothing without stories behind it. So, what does that mean? That means that I have to connect with students by showing personal regard to who they are, what are their experiences, right? How do those experiences inform how they show up before you? So here's a way that we do that. One way we can do that is by simply engaging in weekly one-on-one conversations. You can put a timer on so you can be equitable in your time distribution, right? Setting up time where we're planning within our instruction. This should not be an add-on. Connecting to students and their emotions, their experiences, their motivations are going to have a direct payoff in their academics. So we've got to think about, what do we really want? We want to see our students thrive. We want to see our students do well. We want to see our students exceed even their own expectations, but we do it in the absence of who they are as people. And when we do that, we miss the mark, and we wonder why students are not as engaged. Students are less motivated, even if you have the most exciting lesson. That motivation and engagement is internal. So if we're not connecting with their souls, which is internal, we're going to miss the opportunity to see their genius shine in academics, to see their genius shine in community when they're connecting with their partners and discussing the content that you're working on for that day, when they're connecting in a larger scope, in a larger circle, and they're being those responsible learners. A lot of the time, the reasons why our students, we see misbehavior, we see behavior that is not indicative of their genius, is because oftentimes they don't see the genius in themselves. And when they don't see and when they're not connected, right, to their own genius, they don't respect the genius in other students. So you may see bullying, you may see teasing, harassment, right? All of these things happen even when students are expressing genius, right? So if they're not connected, like Deanna said, then they don't feel a sense of belonging. And when you don't belong in a space or you don't feel as though you belong in a space, you exit that space, even if your physical body is still there. You disassociate from being in that space, whether it's daydreaming, whether it's being distracted and talking to a neighbor when you should be focused on another task, right? Whether it's just apathy, I could care less. I couldn't care any less for doing any of this content, right? Any of those ideas and those dispositions come up because our students oftentimes are not emboldened with their identity of being a lifelong learner. So they detract from the meaning of the content, the meaning of the environment, because there is little connection or no connection. Therefore, they don't feel like they belong. So, as warm demanders, if we're focusing on this, which is showing personal regard by inquiring about their personal lives and events, if we're not doing that, we're going to miss the mark. So, how can you do that? Plan within your lesson time, right? It can be Connection Tuesdays, right? Where students know and this is only if you choose, it doesn't have to be the same day of the week. There's so much fluidity in how you do this, but that certain day of the week, I'm going to have independent work time, right? Or I may have students coupled off and they're working on assignments together, or they may be reading, or they may be writing, or they may be watching a video. And I'm pulling students one by one with a timer for 5 minutes. Right. So we've got others engaging in academics, because here's the caveat. There's a lot of pressure on teachers to always be teaching. When people come around and do evaluations, if our students are working, we feel sometimes a pressure that we should be up talking, we should be up doing something, because there's productivity tied to our worth. And yes, you should be productive because you are at work, but there's also an opportunity for us to say, this is what is going to be vital to my students feeling connected to me, feeling connected to this space, and feeling connected to their own identity. And when they feel connected, they show up differently. So I'm going to plan a day throughout the week, every single week. And if I miss that day of the week, maybe I'm sick, maybe I'm out, maybe a lot of kids are out, maybe it's a field trip, we reschedule that day, because that's a non-negotiable day. That's a day that's very much needed, right? So when I have that day, I'm sitting, I may put on a timer for 5 minutes, and that student has my undivided attention. It's called listening with the soul or listening with grace. We're not doing emails, we're not answering the phone, we're not writing, we're just simply engaging with our students. And we can ask them questions, right? There are a lot of, if you Google search ways to connect to students, or student interview questions, or empathy interview questions, things that will help you connect to your students, you can find a list of questions and maybe come with one or two questions. And here's the thing, it may be awkward when you start, especially if you've not done this before. So you've got to be willing to sit in the discomfort. You've got to be willing to continue to be persistent and see this through, because the only way that you're going to see this actually show up in their academics is going to be your consistency and your persistence. So you're going to do this every week, and you're going to see those students who are less likely to engage, who may be a bit more shy, who may be a bit more withdrawn. Slowly, they're going to come out and they're going to talk, right? Have music playing so that your conversations are not overheard by all the other students, or be at the door and that student's chair can be outside the door and you're talking and engaging in this conversation, right? So you got one eye on the classroom and you got another eye there with the student, and you're able to engage, right? And this also takes you having a strong sense of agreements with your students, right? Where they can operate on their own without you having to be on their shoulder. And that's a challenge sometimes. That also takes consistency. right? Building this environment where students understand the expectations because they've helped you to create them from the beginning. And like I said yesterday on the live on Instagram, even if you have not done this yet, it's not too late. It's not too late. You can start this connection with your students on Monday. You can let them know, hey guys, hey students, I want to connect with you all more. I think there are some things I've been missing out on and just getting to know how amazing you all are. And I take that fault, right? This is being transparent. This is being vulnerable. These are trust generators that help to elicit that oxytocin chemical, which is the bonding hormone in the brain that connects people relationally. And it helps to decrease the release, to mitigate the release of cortisol, that fear hormone that says stop and it's time to fight, flight, freeze, or peace. It helps to do that. So you are letting them know, hey, I haven't done it, but I've been learning. And I want to work with some of the things I've been learning so that I can show up better before you all. So I can know what things are going to make this learning environment and the learning ideas that I have better. Right. So when you're having these one on ones, here's a few things to remember. Have conversation about non academic content. Because if you only focus on seeing your students through the work they produce, that kills the sense of connection. I'm not saying you're not going to mention that, but you need to start with connecting with their non academic life, right? You can even start, especially if you are trying to build rapport with certain students that you might not have a strong relationship with, start by noticing and naming their strengths, right? Yes, non academics. Start by noticing their strengths. So that means you may have to choose a day where you are more observant than normal. And those students who you may think are the most troubled students, the most distracting or disruptive students, find a strength even in their distractive behavior. Maybe they're a great communicator because they like to talk a lot. Maybe they're a great debater because they tend to argue and be confrontational, right? Maybe they're a great helper because they're always helping others when they should be more focused in that time and space. Whatever it is, find ways to look at their strengths and bring them out. So you can start the conversation with, I'm glad you're joining me today. I noticed in class that you are a great communicator. You tend to lead because sometimes they lead, maybe not in the way you want them to lead, but they're a leader nonetheless. Highlight how you see that happening. And then even say, you know what, I would love for you to be able to lead in other ways in the classroom. And then maybe propose some ways that they can lead, right? Some ways that they can be more engaged in the classroom where they're leading instruction. Maybe they're leading the introduction part of your class. Maybe they're leading the restorative circle time that you have in the morning. Maybe they're leading the inspirational quote that you share each day or each Wednesday or whatever it is. Maybe they can lead that, right? Maybe they can get up and go around and collect the papers. Anything that they think is a good way for them to show leadership, right? And so you're doing that with the students. But then in this conversation, you're now also asking them, what kind of things are going on in your life? Do you play any sports? Do you go out and enjoy things in the community? Do you go to church or temple or the mosque? Like what are your things that you do? Do you have siblings? Do you have family? What happens? And even if they're in a situation where it's a bit tough, hopefully these things beforehand so you can be sensitive to some of their needs, right? But you're having these conversations. The goal is to have these conversations and get to know your students on a deeper level. Let them know we're going to talk for about 5 minutes. And during these 5 minutes, I just want to get to know more about you. And then at the end, you can even ask them, is there anything about the way that I've been teaching or the activities that I've had for you all that you liked and didn't like? Because this is going to also be data that can inform your instruction, right? We want to know Think about it from a customer service perspective. The best companies thrive from feedback. The best companies thrive from feedback because they look at what the reviews say. They respond to the reviews. I see companies sometimes on YouTube channels and other spaces where they actually respond even to the negative reviews, and they work to fix it to show that they're interested in the experience of their customer. So if we take a similar perspective as we are engaging with our learners, engaging with our young people, and we say, you know what? I want to know how you're connecting with this assignment. So you can maybe name a particular assignment. What part did you like about it? What was boring? What did you not like? What would you like to do more of? Yes. How can I serve you? Very great sentence. Deanna over here on Facebook says, how can I serve you better? Right? And sometimes they may not know. So maybe you can say things like, well, what can I do to make the lesson more fun? What can I do to get you more interested? What kind of activities can we engage in that really will spark your curiosity and make you want to be engaged? Right? Are there things that other teachers are doing in the class that you really like? Because we can learn from each other. We can learn from our colleagues, and we can most importantly learn from our students. So that is the goal of this second component, or maybe second or third component of being a warm demander, is that we're showing personal interest in our students' lives by inquiring on their experiences, inquiring on life events. So if you know your students, like I had one student, even though I was an instructional coach, I had a club with kids because I always have to stay connected to the kids. And it was a tech club. And one of my students there, his mom had just had a baby. And so oftentimes we would have some of our meetings on Zoom. So he would show us the house and show us the baby. And this student would get in trouble a lot in a lot of other classes. But our relationship and him being such a leader in that group, in that club, was leverage that I use to help motivate him to be on task. But there's only so much motivation I can do if the instruction is not rich with connections. If the instruction is not rich that the other teacher had with a sense of belonging. Because sometimes we as teachers, we get a student's reputation, and instead of us coming in with grace every single day, instead of us giving them a blank slate to try again every single day, we hold grudges. We have attitudes. When we see them coming, we feel all kind of things inside. And instead of working through it, sometimes it shows up on the outside, and our students can feel that energy. They know if they're wanted in that classroom. They know if they belong in that classroom or not. So we've got to think about, as a warm demander, am I being warm or am I being cold or hot? Because if I'm cold, my feelings are cut off and I'm only focused on content. And if I'm too hot, I'm over sensationalizing the environment, where I love my students so much, I show so much care that I don't bring in any high expectations because I don't want them to have the opportunity to struggle. So it causes us to really challenge ourselves and think, am I allowing students to engage in productive struggle, or am I caring so much and a little too much in a way that actually does not allow them to really flourish in their intellectual capacity, right? Because all of this warm demander stuff, you've got to do these things strategically. When you do these things strategically, you're now going to earn the right to demand. Notice the word warm demander. Some of us are out here, or we've had experiences, or we've seen others who are demanding and they have not earned the right to demand. They have not earned the right to demand. Now, when we're at work and there are certain demands on us, we're getting compensated. So there may not be a particular journey of earning the right, because there's an expectation as a worker or as an employee that you're being compensated. Well, our students are not being compensated in that financial way. So there's not an inert drive for them to do the things, because they sometimes don't even understand why they need to do the things. They don't even understand why I'm studying this or reading this or learning this or exploring this. Why? So we've got to think about, if we are being warm demanders, we are earning that right by strategically and explicitly. That means it's in your lesson plans, y'all. It's in your daily plan, that how am I going to build rapport today? That could be a I see you. You did that. Good job. I like how you came in and ended that thesis statement with a powerful stance. I like how you brought that first claim in and you use such descriptive language, right? We're not just saying good job, oh, you did great. We're actually showing them indicators of success. And we're building that rapport by letting them see their success in real time. And then we're actually looking at, if I'm doing these things and I'm also now combining it with the personal regard, then I am earning the right to demand. And there are other ways that we're going to discuss in the next 2 weeks on how to earn the right to demand. But I wanted to focus very heavily on our second one, which is showing personal regard by being interested, being curious about your students' personal lives and events. So I hope that you were able to take something from this live on today. Share this live with a coworker, with another colleague in education, even with those who work outside of the schools but work in youth-centered spaces, because this kind of information is important for everybody. Think about the coaches, right? Coaches earn the right to demand because they come in and students want to be able to play in the game, right? There's got to be something that you are giving them that's going to show them value in the learning. Even if it's just that we had a great time, I experienced joy, I got to be curious, I got to get my hands dirty and work with some stuff. That's the dopamine release. So, how are you planning for the dopamine release? Right? How are you planning for that? One way you can do that is showing that personal regard and inquiring. And then once you inquire, you can also use that data. This is the humanized data component. You can use this humanized data within your lessons. So if you know you've got some students that play little league football, some girls that are in cheerleading, or some students that do chess or whatever it is that they do, if you know these things, you can include these things within the lesson. And that's going to help connect, like Deanna said, connect with them, because then they'll feel like, oh, the multiple parts of my identity actually belong in this space. My identity as an athlete, my identity as a contributor in my family, my identity as a creative, my identity as whatever, right? That is going to be how we make leverage as warm demanders and how we earn the right to demand, right? It is definitely, hey, Tony, data is definitely at our fingertips. We just have to know how to use it. And if we combine that numerical hard data with some warm data that's focused on the soul and who our students are, their experiences, their lives, their dreams, their imaginations. If we combine these two things, we have a full scope of how we can best serve our students. And it helps us, right? It helps you in the long term. I know a lot of people think SEL and social emotional learning is like the mushy stuff. And it's only needed maybe in the first 10 or 15 minutes of class, or it's only needed on this day of the week, or only in advisory classes. But I refute that. It's a part of the emotional brain, because now you're helping to lower the safety threat detection center, where that amygdala, that's a part of that brain in the back that says, you know what? Something is either a threat or an opportunity. And we want our students to see themselves, to see their relationships with us, their relationships with their peers, and their identities within the classroom as an opportunity to thrive. A lot of our kids are still in survival mode, whether it's from outside influences or inside influences, meaning things that have happened to them over time in education, right? Or a combination of both. So we've got to think about, how am I going to present this work as a warm demander? I'm going to show this as an opportunity. And I can only do that by connecting to who my students are. So I'm glad that you all came in with me. Thank you for those who chimed in. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Deanna. Thank you for those who are on LinkedIn. I will see you all on next week. We will be back at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time to go into part 3 of the Warm Demander series. Y'all have a great Saturday.